Hello, this is Daryl Dittmer. I help people overcome addiction, overcome dysfunction, and help create a life that's beyond their wildest dreams.
You're watching Success, Motivation, and Inspiration, where we share interviews with incredible leaders who are crushing it in life and business.
So excited to have you on today. You're doing some stuff really helping people here. But what was the turning point that made you say enough is enough and start your journey of transformation?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, and I was from a very strict household. My dad was a strict guy. He was a mechanic for General Motors. It's just kind of what everybody's dad did, and my mom was also strict and a pretty tough person. And I'm not disparaging them at all. There were so many things about my upbringing that I liked, but I got involved in drugs and alcohol at a fairly young age, the age of 13. And I started down a path that was just not what I had been taught, not what I had been raised to do, not what I had been told that, was a good life for me, and nor a good life for anyone. It progressed fairly quickly until when I was 18, there was an intervention done with basically my parents, and they said, go talk to this drug and alcohol counselor, or for I guess just get out of our life. And that was kind of my choice. So that was a turning point for me, because I had to decide what I wanted to do. I had to decide which direction I wanted to go. And I ended up deciding to go talk to this drug counselor, and he made sure that I got put into a drug and alcohol treatment program just after I turned 19.
And then so that was actually the turning point. Did you have a bunch of times when you had to go back when you relapsed and had to keep going back, or was there a specific decision that really helped you say, this is the time that I'm changing?
There was, and I probably didn't realize it for many, many years, maybe even decades, but December 31st of 1984, I was at a New Year's Eve party, and it was probably with a couple hundred people and many friends and many people who I didn't know. And I was never the loneliest, nor feeling the most isolated and the most depressed and the most distraught that I had felt in my entire life up to that point. And the thought crossed my mind, do I want to be on this planet anymore? And that was really the turning point for me, because I think what it takes for people to change, and no matter what the issue is, whether it's addictions or fears or just feeling like they're stuck or that sort of thing, it takes being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's the point that I got to the point where I didn't know if I wanted to be in here anymore. And 3 days later, I went into a drug and alcohol treatment program.
That's powerful. Was there a specific thing in the treatment? Could you reference a specific counselor or somebody that said something to you that really helped with that change or that mindset shift? The
weird thing is, I don't remember a ton about treatment. I was pretty wrecked going in, but I do remember one counselor that said, and this has stuck with me for the next 40 years. She said, when we'd get done talking, or we'd be in a group therapy session or whatever, and we'd stop talking, she'd say, do you feel finished? And I have carried that with me because it's so important for me to get things out and to not leave things ruminating inside of me. And that's what I try to help people do as well, is I call it taking the garbage out. And that was a very powerful moment for me. The other thing I got out of treatment, which was incredibly useful for me in terms of change throughout the rest of my life, is I got hope. I got hope that I could be different. I got hope that I could be better. I got hope that I could look people in the eye, that I could have confidence, that I could have a reasonable conversation, all of those sorts of things that I had lost, or that maybe in many instances I never had up to that point in my life.
Now, looking back, what beliefs or habits did you have that you had to let go of in order to grow?
All of them. There were, I grew up with a religious education, a religious family, and not that there's anything wrong with religion, but that was something that I had to look at. I had to understand for myself what my belief systems were. And I liken it to putting all my beliefs out on a table and sorting through them and taking a look at them and deciding what's working for me and what's not. And it was very powerful for me to take a look back at what I had been taught in church and the things that I had grown up with, and to be able to say, you know what, this isn't really working for me, which for me created an exploration process, a time where I had to search and I had to seek and I had to find out what worked for me and what didn't. Another one of the belief systems, and I believe life is all about belief systems. Our beliefs create what we do. Our beliefs determine the actions that we take. So I had to go from being literally a liar, a cheat, and a thief to somebody who became honest with myself and honest with other people. And that was a huge turning point for me because life started to feel good. So taking a lot of those belief systems, looking at them, jettisoning what I could, jettisoning what didn't work, and adopting different ways to believe was incredibly powerful for me.
Now, you see that a lot. We are typically interviewing authors, entrepreneurs, motivational speakers, leaders, anybody who's crushing it in life and business. And when we're talking to these successful people, Alex Hormozzi is one. I don't know if you've seen him on Instagram and stuff, but he talks a lot about that, about getting rid of the junk that does not serve you and doubling down on the stuff that actually does. And it's amazing when you look at your life like that, whether it's looking at business or your life, and figuring out what are the things that are really not helping me out here. Could I do without this specific person, this event, this thing that I'm doing in my life? But I love that you said that, because it ties not only into business but into just quality of life, addiction recovery, whatever. What do you wish that more people understood about addiction and recovery?
Well, I think it's for me, and a lot of people talk about it as addiction as a disease, and I was told that, and that was something when I first started coming around and getting straight and sober and straightening my life up, and I thought, you know, that just doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel right to call it a disease, because for me that means I have no control over it, which means I have no control over myself. And if I'm going to change my life and I'm going to change my belief systems and I'm going to change how I'm living to try to be better, to overcome these issues, I can't blame it on anything. I have to
Yep.
take complete responsibility for me and for my life. And that doesn't mean that I'm responsible for everything that happens to me, but it does mean that I am responsible for how I react and how I respond and how I move my life forward. I say this somewhat jokingly because I've heard this in business over time, but I'm the product that I put out in this world, and I'm what I put out on the street. And what's that going to be? And if I'm blaming that product on anything outside of me, then I'm taking away my own power to change.
I heard it was actually somebody else that I'd interviewed that was talking about same thing, had gone through years and years of addiction with every type of substance abuse you could imagine. But he said he'd gone through the 12 steps and all these different programs, saying it's a disease. You're always going to be an alcoholic. You're always going to be a drug addict. You're always, NA, these different programs. And he said when he finally realized, he said this may not be for everybody. When he finally realized that that was an excuse and it was a way to, said when he decided to go back every time he relapsed, he was thinking, well, it's a disease. I really can't help it. I'm just sick and I just need something to get by. But he would fall back on that. It's a disease rather than, hey, this is something I can do to solve a problem myself. So I love that you said that.
Thank
For
you.
somebody that's struggling right now, what's the first practical step that you can take or that they can take in healing?
I think it's really it all comes from within. So the first step is being sick and tired of being sick and tired, and allowing yourself to know that about yourself and about your life and how you're feeling. If you wake up every day and you're just not looking forward to it and you're hating it, and then you dive into the drugs and alcohol or whatever it is, it can be food, it can be gambling, it can be a number of different things. If you're diving into that to try to cope with life and try to feel better, it's important to take a look at that. And I believe there are crossroads that we come to. And sometimes they're very fleeting, but we can come to a point in our lives, which I believe I came to many, many years ago, and I've come to other crossroads since, where we get an opportunity to take an honest look at ourselves. We get an opportunity to just, even if it's for a few minutes, to say, man, this just isn't working. And that's our opportunity to change. That's our opportunity to reach out. That's our opportunity, like you said, maybe it's go to a 12-step meeting. Maybe it's talk to somebody who's been in that situation before, who can help. I think those are the first steps. Number one, to understand that I've had enough. And number two, reach out. There's so many ways to reach out these days that there weren't back when I got involved in this.
I appreciate that, Daryl. Now, how would you explain the difference between emotional sobriety and how's that difference from just staying clean?
That's a huge difference. I referring back to the 12 steps, there's only one step that talks about alcohol or drugs or whatever the issue is. And that's the very first one. The rest of them have to do with improving ourselves. And like I said, I was just 19 when I first got involved in trying to change myself, and I got involved in the 12 steps, and the 12 steps were a roadmap for me. They were a roadmap to living in a different way. So people can become it. My dad dropped alcohol. He dropped smoking. He dropped a few different things in his life, but he didn't, and this is my opinion looking back, but I don't think he worked on himself fervently. And he was a good dude, but he didn't work on himself fervently. And I believe to achieve that emotional sobriety, we have to do things that we don't want to do. We have to look at ourselves, and we have to be honest with ourselves, and we talked about it earlier, take out the garbage, and we have to keep our side of the street clean. And we have to seek to understand other people as opposed to just, I need everybody to understand me. We have to become a real person in this world. There was an old timer that used to say this, and I thought it was kind of boring when he said it, but he was a guy who had been around for 30, 40 years. And he said, the what we're doing here is becoming useful members of society. And I look at becoming a useful member of society as putting the product, which is me, out there and being able to help people and not always thinking of me. And I look at that as changing the world. So I think emotional sobriety is where it's at. Putting away the drugs and alcohol or whatever that addiction is great, but to stay away from it and to become contented, we have to achieve that emotional sobriety.
You were saying so much that applies not just to somebody that is dealing with substance abuse, but also these are things that we're telling our 7-year-old kid, trying to really help him. He's just about to turn 8, but really trying to help him to become somebody that is giving back, providing value, somebody that makes people feel good, that's doing good things in the world, and not having the why me, poor me kind of mentality, whatever. Not that you're looking to write a children's book, but I am really enjoying this conversation. Going, this is so much that I can share with Remington. He'll soon be my stepson, and I'm just really excited about helping him to become a good man. That's a good example and leading others to Christ. And kind of off topic there, but you just sharing.
It's a great thing.
I did not expect to hear talking about addiction recovery. What role did spiritual growth play in your recovery?
It was huge. It was huge, and as I've gone along, because when I was a kid, and I like to portray it as I was given this box of stuff that I was told I have to believe. And here's your box. And if you don't believe it, you could be going into the fire for a long, long time. And so it was like, okay, well, that, to me, that made me fearful. It made me feel guilt when I would do something. It would make me wonder, like, oh man, if there's this, and it was kind of portrayed as there's this dude up there in the white robe with the beard who's writing all this stuff down that you're doing wrong. And that didn't feel good. That just didn't seem like it resonated with me. So as I took myself apart, and it's funny, my dad was a mechanic, like I said, but he used to take cars apart and he'd have all these pieces on the garage floor, right, on on a piece of canvas or something. And that's how I look at myself. I sometimes I have to take myself apart and see what's going on. And I did that, and I started to define what I believed differently. And it became more of a relationship with God as I understand him, or whatever it is, the universe. I don't spend a lot of time defining it, but I do spend a lot of time feeling what that is. And so spirituality, and people say, "Do you believe in God?" I say, "Well, yeah, God and I are real tight." And I truly believe that we are, but it's a very different relationship than what I had grown up being told to believe. Now it's more of a resonance within me to know that I'm heading in the right direction, and the things that I'm doing are correct for myself, but also for everybody else. And I believe that's really what spirituality is. It's getting to connect with ourselves inside, but also having that connection with a power greater than ourselves.
I was talking to we get a whole lot of different folks on here. The majority of our audience are Christian, like I said, authors, entrepreneurs, different leaders, typically leaning more of the Christian faith. But I get a lot of folks on that talk about the universe, or that, thinking that it's energy, or there's some kind of a, got different names for God and stuff. I was talking to Jeff Wobig. You might know Jeff Wobig is on Operation Rhino Wars, Navy SEAL Team 5, SEAL Team 7, won the longest shot in history on the Maxim magazine, Maximum or Ultimate Warrior competition, something like that. But I mean, just a bad dude, but he's also a fervent, just about memorize the Bible. Just, you can ask him anything and he can relate it back to exactly what what was going on there. We were at a men's retreat here a few months ago, and we sat there and talked for hours, and guys would chime in just asking questions. And one of the guys said, well, what about this? What if I just feel like it's the universe that's surrounding me? And he said, it would take a whole lot more faith for me to believe that there was this random bunch of matter. I mean, the guy is brain surgeon smart too. So he starts breaking down the chemical makeup, DNA and RNA and all these different things, and talking about how the fibers of leaves and plants are woven together in the same shape as DNA. And he said, it would take a whole lot more for me to believe that we just randomly had some explosion go off, and all of these insane amounts of things would have had happened perfectly. It would take a lot more faith for me to believe that there was not a creator that loved us unconditionally, and he's not some weird old guy in a white robe that's sitting up there writing down everything we did wrong and everything that he's going to punish us for. He's going, this is the guy that created us from nothing, and that he loves us unconditionally. And so I love that you said that. It just reminded me of Jeff Wobig's conversation there, talking about he would have to have more faith not to believe in God than he would to believe that it was just random.
You brought to mind a couple things for me. One is and I've studied the Bible, I've studied a whole bunch of things, and I'm certainly no biblical scholar or anything like that. But one of the things that was really cool for me to hear, and I only heard it for the first time probably a couple of months ago, but the most oft used phrase in the Bible is "fear not," which I think is very cool. So we're not supposed to be, all the time. And I agree with that 100%. The other one is, and I agree with your friend that it was I think a physicist said at one point, it would be more likely that somebody took a box of refrigerator parts and flung them into a hurricane, and having those become a refrigerator that works, it would be more likely for that to happen than for us to come about by accident. And I 100% agree. 100% agree.
I love that analogy. I've heard some other things about throwing a bunch of car parts into a tornado and have a car come out or whatever, but I haven't heard the one about the refrigerator, but that makes even more sense. What does intentional living mean to you, and how do you practice it daily?
It's everything. It's really everything. It's paying attention to my morning routine, which for me is, I can be sort of an extreme dude. I can go through life at 1,000 miles an hour if you just let me go. And that's not that hasn't that way of living has not worked extremely well for me. So I have a morning practices that I do, which includes quiet time, meditation, it includes breath work. It includes being grateful every morning and going through my list of things that I'm grateful for. It includes exercise. It includes eating correctly. I practice intermittent fasting because my normal way is to just go, 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 and I can tear myself to shreds. And I have to slow myself down. I have to do the right things. And it's all very, very intentional. And then when I go about my days, it's how am I acting toward myself, but also how am I acting toward my wife and my kids and the person who's checking me out at the cash register and all those sorts of things. I truly believe that we have the power to change the world by the very simple things in how we act in this life toward other people. Somebody might be having a bad day, and if I'm open to giving that person a little bit of a smile, I don't know if they're having a bad day or not, but if I'm just real, the reel in here is going off and I'm just thinking about myself, I probably won't give that person a smile. And for me to do that, I have to intentionally understand that I'm not the greatest thing ever created. The entire world outside of me is, and everything else is. And that's very intentional. I think that's how do I go to bed at night? I go to bed at night knowing that I did my best every single day. And I think that's what intentional living is.
Now, tell me about your book, When I Stopped Fighting.
Sure. The first of two, which really it's my story, and it's a number of different stories, some funny, some scary, some horrific. There's just a lot going on in that book, a lot of, sad stuff. I've had people tell me that they cried a couple of times in the book and that sort of things. So it's about addiction, it's about dysfunction, it's about overcoming those things, it's about taking risks, it's about changing ourselves, it's about moving our lives intentionally in a direction. And I think the most important thing for me to say about my book is it's not a you should book. It's not a if you don't do this, you're going to be in trouble book. It's not one of those you have to books. It's about stories and it's about relating and it's about hoping. And the reason I wrote it is hoping that people can take my stories and say, wow, I get it. I understand where he's at. I'm either there or I'm close to that or I've been there or I need to change something. That's really what it's about. It's about relating to another person's life, which just happens to be mine.
Now, one thing that I'm seeing on here as well is we get people a lot of times that are, you look at a book and you can get somebody, you can get 10 reviews on a book pretty easy by having your friends and family and neighbors and Facebook followers ask them, please get on there, leave me a 5-star review. Checking out your book on Amazon right now, you got 214 ratings with a 4.8 star total ranking there. Some very good reviews. People are loving it. So unless you have got, you figure maybe 5% of the friends that you ask are actually going to do it. You've had to affect a whole lot of people to have 214 people already have left you a great review about it. I just want to mention right now, if you're watching this on Amazon Fire TV, pause the episode. If you're on any kind of newer smart TV, pause the episode, scroll down, there'll be a section where you can click and actually buy that book, have it delivered to your iPhone, Android, tablet, iPad, whatever you're doing on the new smart device. But the book is called When I Stopped Fighting, The Unexpected Joy of Getting My Head Out of My Butt by Daryl Dittmer. So I just highly recommend you get a copy of the book, check it out, and leave a good review as well. I think this will help a lot of people, a lot more people, hopefully.
Thank you.
How can somebody begin designing a life that actually excites them?
There's a lot of quotes around that for me have helped me. And one of those is, I think it was Epictetus, an old Stoic, one of the early Stoics or whatever. He said, it is impossible to learn what we think we already know. And I truly believe, I'll tell you a little story if we have time for that. This is a cool little story. I said I grew up with the 12 steps in terms of when I first got sober and straight and that sort of thing. And I used to go to this meeting on Friday nights, and there was this gentleman there. His name was Jimmy, and at that time he was sober about 40 years, and he was kind of slight in stature and a little hunched over, and an older guy, and just a cool guy. He didn't say much. But one of the things that he did, and I'm there with all my young friends, we're like, we're clowns still, just doing our thing, going to meetings. Some guys were serious about being sober, which I was. Some guys weren't. And he'd be at this meeting, and he would be the only guy that I ever saw at any meeting ever. And I went to hundreds, if not thousands. He would get up and he'd fill the coffee carafe and he'd go fill people's coffee. And he would just this humble experience and this service that he gave, people who, and there's a little bit of a hierarchy, somebody who's been sober 40 years, like, wow, man, that's a deity. Like, wow, somebody's been sober that long. But he was the guy who did the humble things. And I thought that was incredibly cool to watch. But one of the things that he used to say, and it ties in with that quote from Epictetus, is Jimmy would say, if you want a life that's really worth living and that you love getting up every day with a smile on your face, stay small. Learn how to stay small, which really means stay humble. And another way of saying humble to me is staying teachable. I need to understand that there's an entire universe of things out there for me to know, and there's an entire universe of things in here for me to know and to understand about myself and to understand about other people. So if I can stay small, if I can understand that I don't have all the answers, then I'm open to learning and I'm open to understanding what's going on within me. And I think that's the way to improve ourselves and improve our lives and to help improve other people's lives.
Making it a goal in your life to be able to serve other people and to positively influence, positively impact people, I think is so powerful. Do you think that was something that helped him to stay sober for so long, making it intentional, where he's intentionally looking for ways to make people's lives better and serve them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's an element of, and I'm not going to say addiction is caused by selfishness, but there's an element of getting better that has to do with not being so concerned about ourselves and starting to be concerned about other people. And there's a quote, everybody's heard the quote, "To thine own self be true." And I 100% agree with that quote. It's from Shakespeare, Hamlet, and it's a beautiful quote, but the entire quote is, "And this above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." And it's a beautiful way of saying that if I'm true to myself and doing the right things, I'm going to be automatically true to you. I'm not going to be lying. I'm not going to be dishonest. I'm not going to be, doing things that are untoward toward other people. I'm going to be doing the right things. And I think that's incredibly important. I think Jimmy understood that very, very well.
What lessons from addiction recovery made you a better entrepreneur?
There were so many lessons. I believe that to be good in the business world and not just to be good in the business world, but life is for me, I have to pay attention to my body, to my mind, to my heart, and to my soul. And I truly believe that 100%. And those are big things in both of my books, is talking about body, mind, heart, and soul. And to have a successful life, when I first got sober, I was like, all right, I'm going to go after this whole life thing and I'm going to rip it up and I'm going to make a bunch of money and I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And I got sick. I had some intestinal disease stuff that I had to deal with. And I worked myself into being in trouble. I was fairly unhealthy. And so success for me was, go make a bunch of money. And I did that. But success at some point in that process became, if I wake up in the morning with a smile on my face, that's success. And what contributes to that for me contributing to that for me is as I talked about, taking care of body, taking care of mind, taking care of heart, taking care of soul, because things aren't always going to go well. Things aren't always going to go right. Things, there's going to be obstacles, there's going to be problems, there's going to be all sorts of stuff that happens that stinks, and it makes it difficult and makes us want to quit. And so if I'm only working on making money, I'm I'm shirking my responsibility in those other areas of life, which are the other areas of me. So being able to withstand the storms is incredibly important in terms of moving a business forward and moving my life forward financially. And so there's, to me, it's all holistic. It's something that I have to pay attention to, the entire thing, the entirety of me, the entirety of my life, not just to be good at business, but to appreciate what I've achieved and to appreciate and be grateful for what's happening and the journey and watching all of the steps. There's so much there. That's a huge question because it's just absolutely crucial to take those lessons about me and move those into my business and the rest of my life.
And now, kind of springing off from that, your first book was called When I Stopped Fighting. What do you hope? What do you hope that readers take away from your second book, When You Stop Fighting?
When You Stop Fighting it's about our wish list in this life, and it absolutely springs from what we just talked about. It's, what are the things that most people want? They want great relationships, they want purpose or meaning, happiness or contentment, peace of mind, maybe some financial security. All of those things are things that we want, and I call those our wish list. The question is, how do we go about trying to get to those things? Because for a lot of people, it goes into addictions. It's really that we're all looking for the same stuff. It's just, what are we doing to try to get there? And so sometimes, like, I went down the road of addiction and just a dysfunctional life, and I thought that was going to get me some of that stuff that I wanted, but I found out that it didn't. So When You Stop Fighting is about the fight that we have with ourselves and recognizing the fight that we have with ourselves and what do we need to do to change that. And I can measure my life based on that wish list. And the funny thing is that wish list, 99% of it's right inside me. And then the rest springs from that. I'll just tell you a quick little story about how the books came to be titled like that. I had a mentor and I grew up fighting. I grew up, if you're not hurt, if there's not a bone sticking out or you're not bleeding out or whatever, and fake it till you make it and work through the pain and all that sort of stuff. Just, all that fight, wrestle, fight harder on your problems, fight on all this stuff. And my mentor said to me one day, as he watched me fighting through my problems, he said, "Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops." And I was like, oh, so it's about me. It's not about the world. And that's really what book 2 attempts to portray, is when you stop fighting mostly yourself. But the first thing we have to do is stop fighting all these things in the world, our addictions and our what we think are all the ways that are going to get us to happiness.
How would you recommend somebody right now that's struggling with addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever? What is something that they could do to give back? An easy step that they could take that would really make an impact on them and others?
It's really difficult to get out of that selfishness or self-absorption while we're in the midst of addiction. It's really difficult to do that. And one of the things we talked about a little bit earlier is to understand and to recognize and look at, am I being good for myself, and am I being good for the rest of the world? And it's not just having a job. It's not just getting up and going to work every day. It's losing maybe that self-centeredness. And for me, believe me, I've been through all this stuff, which is why I talk about it so passionately is can I stop thinking about myself enough to strike up a conversation with somebody at the gas station, or say hi to someone on the sidewalk, or look somebody in the eye and smile, that might brighten their day. And that's really hard to do when I'm mired in any addiction, because the nature of addiction is where I spend my mind and my heart time is trying to feed that addiction. And so until I get out of that addiction, it's really hard to be of as much use to myself and the world as I can be once I'm out.
How could somebody reconnect with or find their purpose if they're feeling lost or numb?
I think it starts with reaching out. First, it starts with understanding where we're at, understanding that we're not where we want to be, that we're not achieving what we want to achieve, that we're not moving in the direction that we want to move. One of the things my second book talks about is our trajectory and understanding. I look at it as, north versus south, and am I heading north, and am I trying to achieve true north, which doesn't mean perfection, because I don't think that's possible, but am I heading in a general direction that's moving me forward in my life? Or am I heading in a direction that's moving me in a southerly trajectory in my life? And I think, again, those crossroads, that time when we can take a look and say, and have that moment of honesty with ourselves, or that moment of illumination that allows us to reach out or say I need help. One of the hardest things that was for me to do in much of my life, and even today sometimes, is to say, you know what, I need help. But that's probably the most important bit of honesty we can have with ourselves, is to admit that and then reach out to try to find it. And once we do that, our trajectory changes. Once we do that, things have changed, and that's just a matter of what are we going to do after that to continue that direction.
So now, again, talking to somebody that's watching this that is struggling with a bit of addiction, alcohol, drugs, whatever, what's one small change that someone could make today to start improving their life?
I think that there's such a value to openness and to the humility to say, I need to be teachable, because one of the things that's characterized, I think, in addiction is I got it. I know what's going on. Don't worry. I don't need help. I got this. I'm fine. All those things. And I did all those things. And I do all those things sometimes still. And thank God my wife, takes care of me when I do that. But I think it's important to understand and to say, not just to ourselves, but maybe to someone else, I need help. Can you help me? Can you help me to reach out? Can you help me to find a different direction? Can you help me to change, because I'm not happy and my life isn't going the way I want it to go? Just that moment of reaching out, I think, is one thing that's incredibly important. And there's so many ways to reach out nowadays. There's so many ways to take advantage of different groups and whatever societies, functions. It can be online. I mean, there's tons of ways online to figure out who can potentially help.
Now, speaking to that same person that you're talking to right now that's watching this, how can they turn their pain into purpose like you did?
Well, for me, it was the pain of the life that I had, but also the pain of changing. And I think it's so important to understand that there's going to be pain in change. There's going to be times when we don't want to. There's going to be times when we want to quit and go back to the old way. There's going to be times when we just get exhausted and we don't want to do it anymore. And I think it really helps to try to develop a mindset to understand that there's probably going to be more pain before things start to get better, before we start to see the light, before we start to feel better. But it will come. And I think that's the most important thing to understand, that if we start changing and we start moving in a direction, I can 100% guarantee, and I will say this with all sincerity, that 100% of people that did all the work changed for the better. And the people that didn't do all the work didn't change for the better. So once we start, just keep going.
This interview is sponsored by Newswire magazine. We celebrate the entrepreneurs and thought leaders shaping the future, those who don't just adapt, but innovate, who inspire others to think bigger, lead boldly, and create lasting change. Only a select few are featured in Newswire magazine, and for those who earn a place on the cover, the opportunities are unmatched. Your story shared with a global audience, your achievements celebrated on national billboards, reaching millions. Every leader has a story. Every vision deserves a platform. Who will rise to the top? Stay tuned. You're witnessing greatness unfold.
Hey, welcome back to Success, Motivation, and Inspiration. I'm really enjoying this conversation I'm having here with Daryl Dittmer. If you guys have got a chance, again, if you're watching this, pause the show, scroll down, buy a copy of When You Stop Fighting and also buy When I Stop Fighting, both of Daryl's books. I think it's really going to be a powerful thing for you, even if you're not struggling with addiction. We've all got some kind of a problem, something that we're trying to get over. I think these are going to be great books to help you out. Daryl, do you have any final thoughts for somebody listening to this right now that is just looking for a change in their life?
I'm such a big fan of just start, and whatever it is, and it may be fears, it may be addiction, it may be addiction to something as simple as social media, it may be something, with food or with gambling or whatever it is, or it may just be, you know what, I don't feel good getting up every day, and I want to feel differently, I want to feel better. And I think the thing we need to do to get us off of that spot that's so easy to get comfortable in is to just start. Do one thing that may help move our lives or move your life in a different direction. And once you do that one thing and you start to see some results, you're going to do the second thing, and you're going to want to do the third thing. And then you're not going to be able to help wanting to do the fourth thing and the fifth thing and the 10th thing and the 100th thing and whatever that is. So just starting and taking that first step, although I know it's scary, but once you do that, you can start the momentum in a different direction and move your life in a way that you want to see it be.
Daryl, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. This has just been an absolute powerful conversation. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching Success, Motivation, and Inspiration. This episode was designed to help you level up. See you next time.